Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
My name is Brenda. Welcome to Horrifying History, where you will hear about the unexplained and supernatural events that have stained the pages of history. There are moments in history when doing the right thing requires extraordinary courage. There are other moments when doing the right thing is guaranteed death. So get out your wristwatch cameras and lipstick guns, my spooky friends. Today, you will hear the story of some very brave teenagers who should have been worried about exams, but instead chose to fight a dictator. When the First World War ended in 1918, Germany was broken. Their economy collapsed, millions of people were dead, and they felt humiliated by the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. German citizens felt betrayed, impoverished, and very angry. Hyperinflation became so severe that wages had to be spent within hours before they lost value. Unemployment was predominant, and political violence became the norm. And into this chaos stepped Adolf Hitler. Hitler promised jobs and that he would make Germany great again. For many desperate citizens, his promises were intoxicating. On January 30th, 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany after being appointed to the position by German President Paul von Hindenburg. Within months, democracy was effectively dismantled. Hitler's political opponents disappeared, books were burned, and journalists were silenced. Independent organizations were dissolved, and fear became the new way of governing. Hitler understood something that many before him did not. If you want to control the future, you must control the children. Hitler didn't want obedient citizens. He wanted believers. One of his first orders was for the children to be taught Nazi ideology in school. Textbooks were rewritten, and teachers were forced to teach loyalty to the regime. Biology classes twisted science into racist propaganda. History lessons glorified Germany's expansion while erasing the truth. Outside the classroom, Nazi pressure on the nation's children only intensified. They did this by creating youth organizations to further push the Nazi agenda. The most famous of these were the Hitler Youth for Males and the League of German Girls for Females. At first, membership was encouraged, but soon it became mandatory. Uniforms replaced individuality, and camping trips were mixed with military drills. Obedience became the highest virtue. Children were taught that only loyalty to Hitler came before their loyalty to their families. My spooky friends, think back to the time that you were 12 years old. Imagine what would happen if you were hearing this propaganda at that age, or even younger. Imagine being told that if your parents criticized the government, it was your duty to report them. Some children in Germany during the Nazi era did just that. The state rewarded loyalty and punished those who didn't follow its orders. A simple, careless mark at the dinner table could bring the Gestapo, which was a secret state police, to your front door. Families stopped speaking openly, and trust began to dissolve. By the late 1930s, millions of German children knew no other reality than what the Nazis told them. Hitler was not just a politician to these children. He represented a father figure and a savior. If you look back at photographs from this time, you will see smiling children reaching out to Hitler like he was the biggest pop star performing on stage, and they were in the front row. The Nazi ideology became routine and the new normal, which is exactly what Hitler wanted. But not everyone wanted to comply. Some teenagers wanted their freedom, and during these times, independence was a threat. The Gestapo kept files on anyone considered disloyal. Their letters were opened and their phones were tapped. Neighbors turned in neighbors, and students reported teachers. Nobody knew who could be listening in. Long before any organized resistance groups were created, teens did isolated acts of defiance. They mocked Nazi slogans and kept banned books hidden under floorboards. But every dictatorship fears the small acts of independence because they remind people that conformity is not inevitable. In response, the Nazi regime created organizations like the Gestapo and the People's Court. Trials only lasted a few minutes and verdicts were predetermined. Appeals were meaningless. It was during this time that some teenagers chose to stand up to the Nazis. They didn't do this because they thought they would survive. They did this because they believed that Hitler needed to be stopped. When we think about resistance groups during the Second World War, we often picture soldiers or spies. But that was not the reality. Sometimes teens would stand up for change, and some of them once belonged to the Hitler Youth Corps. They recognized the horrors that unfolded around them. Some never believed the propaganda from the very beginning. Their backgrounds differed, but they all shared one conviction: Germany would no longer stay silent. Courage is not measured by age. It's measured by what a person chooses to do when fear demands surrender. It was vital for the Nazis to control Germany's youth. After all, if they would obey without question, the future of the Third Reich would be secure. But not every child or teen fit the Nazi mold. Throughout Western Germany, small groups of teenagers quietly began to drift away from the rigid discipline of Hitler's youth. They desired freedom. They played the role of the perfect soldier, and on their uniforms, some would pin an Edelweiss flower to their lapels. This flower became the symbol of defiance. The authorities called them troublemakers, but history remembers them as the Edelweiss Pirates. At first, their resistance was small. They skipped mandatory Hitler Youth meetings and mocked Nazi officials behind their backs. They would gather in parks or forests to speak openly without anyone around to turn them in. But in Nazi Germany, refusing to conform was seen as an act of rebellion. The Gestapo began to open files on these teens. Patrols were instructed to watch them very closely, but this only made the teens harden their resolve. As the Second World War intensified, the pirates became bolder. They started tearing down Nazi propaganda posters as quickly as they were put up. In the cover of darkness, they would paint anti-Hitler messages on building walls. They stole supplies from military depots, punctured the tires of military vehicles, and sabotaged equipment that was going to be sent to the front lines. Most dangerous of all, they began helping people the Nazis wanted dead to escape. They would provide food and shelter to help them cross borders to escape Hitler's wrath, knowing that this could result in a death sentence if caught. Even so, some teens did it anyway, and one of the best known was Bartholomäus Schenk. The 16-year-old, who was known as Bartol, refused to let the Nazis decide how he lived his life. As Allied bombing raids devastated German towns and cities, Barthel and other teens navigated the streets using the chaos as a way to move without being noticed, but the Gestapo was closing in. By late 1944, the Nazi regime was becoming desperate. Military defeats were adding up, and the Allied armies and Soviet soldiers were advancing. Nazis started seeing enemies everywhere. Teens who were dismissed as rebellious children were now thought to be dangerous criminals. Mass arrests started, and interrogations were brutal. Some prisoners were put in concentration camps without a trial. On November 10, 1944, the Nazis decided to make an example so that other children would not try to rise up. In the city of Cologne, 13 teens were accused of belonging to a resistance group that included some members of the Edelweiss Pirates. Barthol was part of the Hitler Youth, but he did not support the Nazi regime. He joined the Pirates, and he and his friend Gunther Schwartz worked with a group that stole supplies like guns and explosives. They were eventually caught and were severely mistreated while in prison. They didn't have a fair trial and were not allowed to present a defense. They were sentenced to death, and the executions were carried out in public so citizens would see what would happen if they rebelled. Barthol was one of 13 that was killed that day, and he, along with others, were hanged and left there for hours. The message that the Nazis wanted to send was unmistakable: obey or die. But the pirates continued until the final months of the war. Many survived by hiding in the ruins of bombed cities, and they continued carrying messages, stealing supplies, and helping those running from Nazi authorities. One of the survivors was Zahn Ulich, and he was one of the last surviving members of the pirates. He lived with his grandparents from the age of 7 after he saw his father beaten badly by the Gestapo and thrown in jail for high treason. Zahn became involved with supplying black market food and shelter to people trying to escape Hitler's wrath, who were German army deserters and concentration camp escapees. He, along with others, attacked Hitler Youth patrols, derailed ammunition trains, and sabotaged machinery. Their plan to bomb the Gestapo headquarters in Cologne was the event where Zahn was caught. The plot was that they would blow up the headquarters using unexploded British bombs. The Gestapo learned about this attack after a 23-year-old pirate had shot and killed a Nazi informer. Zahn, who was 15 at this time, was arrested as part of this. He was held in solitary confinement without trial and was tortured for months on the order of Heinrich Himmler, who is best known as the main architect of the Holocaust and the mass genocide of Jews during the war. Zahn was held for a year, during which he was regularly tortured, starved, and contracted typhus in a concentration camp. When the camp was liberated in 1945, he was freed. But his good friend, who was on the same mission as him, was not as lucky. That friend was Barthol Schenk. Today, the Edelweiss flower, which was once viewed with suspicion by the Gestapo, has become a symbol of courage. The Edelweiss pirates were not the only teens rebelling against the Nazi regime. There was another group that targeted the Third Reich in a completely different way: by dance. They listened to forbidden American jazz and British swing music and wore fashionable English-style clothing. To Adolf Hitler, they represented a rejection of everything that his regime stood for. These young people became a group called the Swing Youth, and before long, the Gestapo came for them as well. The teens who became known as the Swing Youth were not political activists at first. Many came from middle or upper-class families who attended good schools. Some came from families that supported Hitler and his Nazi regime. But these teens were drawn to something that the Third Reich could not provide: individuality. They embraced British and American fashions. Males grew their hair longer, and girls adopted styles that were considered to be modern and different. They would greet each other with phrases from British and American culture rather than Nazi slogans. Most importantly, they would gather in secret to listen to swing music. To Nazi leaders, this was a threat. Nazi ideology was all about conformity, and swing music encouraged self-expression. They claimed that this music weakened German values and was a foreign corruption. The more it was condemned, the more attractive it became. Teenagers gathered in secret in dance halls, private homes, and hidden meeting places where the British and American broadcasts were listened to in secret. This music became a symbol of freedom. As this movement grew, Nazi supporters began to submit reports to the Gestapo, who believed that the swing youth was arrogant and unpatriotic. Gestapo investigators began to attend these dances undercover. They took photos of those at these dances, and names were recorded. The Gestapo then created files on all of these teens, since they saw this as political resistance. Teens were arrested, and their parents were questioned. Some were expelled from school, while others were sent to labor camps. By 1941, the Nazis viewed the teens who were part of the swing youth as enemies of the state. These young people's biggest crime was listening to and dancing to music that Hitler did not approve of. Members of the swing youth simply wanted to live their lives and not be forced to conform. But the Nazis wanted uniformity and not self-expression. As the war dragged on and Germany's position weakened, resistance amongst teens continued to evolve. Some of the swing youth rebelled through culture, and others did so through action. During all of this, there was a 16-year-old boy who decided to fight with something even more dangerous: the truth.
What would you do if your online store converted 36% more shoppers? You could take 36% more vacation.
Another pina colada?
Yes, please.
Open a new retail location with 36% more square feet.
Fantastic.
Hire 36% more help.
You're hired and you're hired.
Shopify has the world's best converting checkout, up to 36% better than other e-commerce platforms. What you do with those extra sales is up to you. Switch to Shopify today at shopify.com/listen and get a $1 trial. Shopify.com/listen.
In Hamburg lived a teenager named Helmut Hebner. He appeared to be a normal teen on the outside. There was nothing about him that would suggest to anyone that he would become one of the youngest executed resistance fighters of the Third Reich. Everything started when the 17-year-old wanted to know what was really happening, since the Nazis controlled all German newspapers and radio broadcasts. Listening to foreign media was strictly forbidden. Even so, Helmut secretly listened to broadcasts from the BBC, and he was shocked by what he learned. Reports from Britain contradicted everything that Nazi media was reporting. German victories were exaggerated, and defeats were not mentioned. Nazi press did not speak about casualties, and propaganda replaced reality. Helmut realized that the government was lying to the public, and that he had to make a choice. He could either remain silent or take action. Helmut decided to act. Helmut and his friends Karl-Heinz Schnibe and Rudolf Wobeth started creating anti-Nazi pamphlets. In these, the three exposed Nazi propaganda and encouraged Germans to be wary of the information that the government was releasing. Doing this was very dangerous. If the government found out that they were doing this, they risked being arrested. To get an idea what these pamphlets were like, one of them stated, and I quote, "German boys, do you know the country without freedom, the country of terror and tyranny? Yes, you know it well, but are afraid to talk about it. They have intimidated you to such an extent that you don't dare talk for fear of reprisals. Yes, you are right. It is Germany, Hitler Germany. Through their unscrupulous terror tactics against you and old men and women, they have succeeded in making you spineless puppets to do their bidding." Now, doing this was a huge risk, and eventually the danger caught up with him. One of his co-workers became suspicious after seeing Helmut translating his pamphlets into French. The co-worker belonged to the Nazi Party, and soon afterwards, the Gestapo arrested Helmut at his workplace. On August 11, 1942, he was tried as an adult for high treason. He was sentenced to death. Helmut's lawyer, family, and the Berlin Gestapo begged for clemency in this case and for his sentence to be reduced to life in prison. The Gestapo believed that since Helmut confessed everything and showed himself to be morally uncorrupted, he should not be sentenced to die. The Reich's youth leadership disagreed. They believed that Helmut's activities made the death penalty necessary. On October 27th, the court upheld this verdict, and he was executed by guillotine at the age of 17. His friends who helped him release the pamphlets were also arrested. They got a sentence of 10 years in prison each. The stories of the Swing Youth and Helmut Hiebener reveal something very important. Resistance does not always look the same. Sometimes it looks like a crowded dance floor, and other times it's a hidden radio. The methods may be different, but the courage is still the same. Soon, another group of teens would take that courage even further. Unlike the Swing Youth, they openly challenged the Nazi regime. They also operated a larger network, and their group became legendary. The White Rose. Two of their members showed bravery that would echo through history: Hans and Sophie Schroll. On February 18, 1943, students moved between lectures inside the University of Munich like any other day. Then, a single piece of paper fell, and another, and another. Students picked them up and started to read what was on them. It said, and I quote in part, "Since the conquest of Poland, 300,000 Jews have been murdered in this country in the most brutal way." When the students began to pick up the papers, a janitor noticed two people watching from the second floor. It was a teenage male and female standing near a railing with a stack of identical papers at their feet. In Nazi Germany at this time, writing the truth usually resulted in death. By the early 1940s, Hitler's control over Germany was absolute. Dissent has been crushed, and opposition parties were erased. The press only printed what they were told to, and the Gestapo ensured that silence was enforced. But some cracks began to widen. Many of Germany's youth had grown up with the regime, and some had never trusted it. Young German men were sent away to fight on the Eastern Front, and many of those who returned questioned the propaganda that they had been fed since they were children. Among them were medical students from the University of Munich who became known as the White Rose. The group began with siblings Hans and Sophie Schroll. They both were members of the Hitler Youth as children, like the majority of German teenagers during these times. But Hans started to change. He was once enthusiastic about the regime, but after going to war, his beliefs changed. Sophie followed a similar path. She too questioned what she had seen and was told. In Nazi Germany, this alone was an act of rebellion. When the two went to university, they met like-minded students: Alexander Schmorell, Willy Graf, and Christoph Prost. They would later be joined by Professor Kurt Huber, who was a respected academic who shared their disgust of Nazi ideology. The White Rose did not begin with violence. It began with writing. In 1942, the group started producing anonymous leaflets that condemned Hitler, the war, the mass murder of Jews, and the moral collapse of German society. One leaflet asked the question that cut through Nazi propaganda like a knife. Why do you allow these men who are in power to deprive you step by step of your freedom openly and secretly? The leaflets were not propaganda, but they were warnings and appeals for people to stand up against the Nazis. This message started to spread, and the group expanded their efforts. Some members of the White Rose were sent to the Eastern Front as medical students. It was there that they saw the truth behind the Nazi regime, and this hardened their resolve. By the time these individuals came back to Munich, the White Rose was no longer just an intellectual movement. It was an active resistance group. But what they didn't know was that their time was running out. Back at the University of Munich, Hans and Sophie arrived with a suitcase full of leaflets. Their plan was simple: place stacks of them outside lecture halls and let their ideas spread. As the lectures ended that morning, Sophie decided to carry the remaining leaflets to the top floor, and she threw them over the railing. As the paper was falling, students stopped, unsure what was happening. They picked up the papers and started reading. That is when the janitor saw the siblings. He recognized Hans and Sophie immediately and called the Gestapo. Within minutes, the two were arrested. Hans and Sophie were interrogated, and at first they denied that they did anything. The Gestapo was trained to break people, but the siblings did not break. During interrogation, Hans tried to take responsibility for everything to save his sister, but Sophie refused to let her brother take all the blame. Within hours, their case went to court. Their trial was presided over by Roland Freiser, who was one of the most notorious judges in Nazi Germany. He was well known for turning trials into performances of terror. The siblings were accused of treason, and Roland made his decision instantly. The two were sentenced to death. Hans and Sophie were to be executed that same day. Later that afternoon, Hans and Sophie were executed by guillotine. Both showed no fear and were stoic. Others who were involved with the White Rose were also arrested and executed. This resulted in the White Rose being dismantled. The Nazis believed that they had erased the White Rose from existence, but they were wrong. Copies of their leaflets were smuggled out of Germany and reprinted by the Allies. The Allies then dropped them over German cities by plane. The leaflets that the Nazis thought they had repressed were everywhere and became weapons against them. After the war, Germany recognized what these teens had done. Hans and Sophie Schroll became symbols of moral courage under the Nazis' dictatorship. There are many memorials for the Scholl siblings at the University of Munich and the surrounding area. Many cities in Germany have streets, plazas, schools, and buildings named after them. This is not because they succeeded in their plans. It's because they refused to stay silent. It is easy to imagine resistance as something loud and in your face, but sometimes it's much quieter. A sheet of paper falling from the sky, a leaflet being typed in secret, or a person deciding that truth matters more than survival. The White Rose did not stop Hitler, but they did something just as important. They proved that even in the darkest times of history, not everyone agreed with what was happening. Dictators rely on the belief that no one speaks out, and the White Rose proved to them that they were wrong. When the Nazi regime collapsed in 1945, cities lay in ruins and millions of people were dead. Scattered through this trauma were stories that had been nearly erased, and many of these stories were of young people who refused to conform. For a long time, many of these teenagers were not recognized for the heroes they are, but over time, things have changed. Their stories started to be told by historians, and they realized that these stories were warnings. These teens revealed something essential about resistance. It does not always begin with certainty or strength. Sometimes it begins with confusion, discomfort, the feeling that something is wrong, and deciding not to ignore it. That is what makes their courage so powerful. They have been groomed to believe that Nazi propaganda was true. They grew up inside the very system that they came to oppose. To stay safe, people had to conform or die. But they still chose to stand up because they knew that silence was worse than the consequences. The Nazis tried their best to silence the people of Germany, but silence never lasts forever. Only truth does. Thank you for joining me today. What are your thoughts on the bravery of the teens who stood up to the Nazi Party? Let us know your thoughts on Facebook at Horrifying History, Instagram and Threads at Horrifying_history, X at Horrifying HIST1, or on Blue Sky by searching for Horrifying History. If you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to our podcast. When you do, you not only let more people know about our show, but also download our next episode on its release day. It's a great way not to miss our next episode. The Quack Who Could Be Jack, Dr. Francis Tumblety. To learn even more about horrifying history, you should visit our website. When you're there, you will find links to all of our social media and to our YouTube channel, which features not just our podcast episodes, but also additional history-based videos for your enjoyment. We also have a blog that's filled with spooky topics and episode updates to read up on. On top of this site is the home to our fan club, which has excellent perks like your own feed to listen to our show ad-free, access to new episodes a week early, and new bonus episodes each week. It is also the home to our store filled with spooky merchandise that you guys will love. For our fan club members, you will get a permanent discount in our store as long as you remain a fan club member. You can find all of this and more at horrifying-history-shop.fourthwall.com. Until next time, stay spooky.